please gather around.
Have those lights or not?
Yeah, we can have them back on again. Gather round, we're about to start again.
Gather round. Right.
Gather round, thanks Jane. Thank you. Okay, how do you know how you feel? We might like to have a microphone for this. Thanks, Stephanie. Any thoughts? How do you know how you feel? Thoughts. And you can think about your thoughts, yeah? Emotions. What provokes those? What provokes the emotion in the first place?
A good one or a bad one. Depends what you're thinking.
Yeah? Sensation in the body? Okay. It'd be nice, but if it's just single words, I can mostly repeat it.
Prior experiences and memories might evoke a particular emotional response.
Might, yep.
Yeah.
I was reading an interesting question to someone was asked, how do you feel? And she said, fear. And
how do you
feel? And the lady said, fear.
Okay.
And he said, what's fear? What do you feel?
Yep.
Fear is a concept, an intellectual concept. And actually analyzing it, what do you actually feel? And the lady then said, sweat, warmth, tingling. But actually, certain emotions, we make an intellectual concept out of it.
Absolutely. We are complex systems. We have brains to make sense of our experience. So we interpret the sensations and the input that we get from our environment, from within our bodies, from our interactions between the two. But then often we very quickly start to put words on that and say, oh, when I have this sensation, I interpret this as whatever it is.
I've over the last sort of month or weeks, I've really come to notice that the way I feel responds a lot to the actually tension in my body, like the amount of tension there is, and as well as the energy level that there is. So sometimes it's a really high energy, and that can be nervous, or that can be a lot of joy or excitement, and sometimes it's a really low energy and really combined with different states of tension, and the same what Martina said, like warmth, or it's a lot about the sensation.
Okay, so there are a whole bunch of sensations that we can pay attention to. Some of them we might be aware of. Some of them we're just learning how to be aware of. And as we start to work with ourselves in this process of awareness through movement, and we begin to work with each other as we put our hands on and begin to prepare for functional integration, there's information that we're gathering that allows us to make judgments, to adjust what we're doing. And why would we want to do that?
It feels better.
It might feel better. And better's a great place to be heading for in many contexts, but it does imply, to a degree, a destination of sorts.
No.
No.
When I say better, it's the only adjective I've got. What I actually mean is I can feel. I am aware of this, and the awareness brings me joy, whether it feels like, oh crap, I really just hurt my hip again in that last session, or wow, I've just got more breathing in my ribs.
So your direction of intention is to be more aware.
Is to be aware, and what I really like is actually hanging out with other human beings and seeing them and looking at their faces and talking to them and having that shared awareness that feels like being more human.
Sure. So there's a myth that sometimes floats around in the Feldenkrais world that we don't have goals or intentions. And Stephanie's told you many times in the past couple of days, it's not about getting there, it's about having a direction. But if we don't have an intention or a direction or an idea of where we might like to go, we could end up anywhere or nowhere. So I'd like to share with you an analogy from a completely different frame of reference. And it's a fairly high-tech kind of idea, and it's applied in space technology and a whole lot of other cybernetic systems. But if we think about the intention of sending a rocket from the Earth to land at a particular place on the Moon or on Mars, that's a fairly complex and challenging goal, and yet people can do it. So here's the Moon sitting up there, and here's our little rocket ship down here. Probably got a few portholes in it. Okay, and somehow the scientists sitting down here behind their computers have done all their thinking and planning and measuring and observing and decided that Mr. Moon's right earlobe is exactly the place that they would like to land. And so off they go, and the rocket heads off in its best intention possible. But if that's the ideal path, pretty soon it's heading off track. Now, in this really high-tech kind of world, I have been told that the rocket spends something like 98% of its time off track. Is this reassuring? Yes. Good. It should be. How much time do you spend off track? A lot? That much? Maybe you've got room for improvement. Maybe you could spend a little more time off track. Because the only way that the rocket can tell that it's off track is when it gets far enough that it can measure this distance. The distance between kind of where it's heading now and where it thinks it wants to get to. When we're on track, it's really hard to tell because there's nothing to compare with. And this is one of the techniques that to my mind is really essential in the whole Feldenkrais approach, is being able to have something to contrast or compare with. So often you'll be asked, what's it like on the right side? What's it like on the left side? What's it like in this direction? What's it like in that direction? Because we can get much more information about what's going on when we've got two things to compare. So the rocket does its little comparison. It says, whoops, I'm off track, I better correct a bit, and so off it heads in this direction until once again it's far enough away to measure, and so it kind of zigzags its way to the Moon. But as it gets closer, the zigs and zags get a little bit smaller. It's able to make finer distinctions so that it has to go less off track before it can kind of come back and approach where it wants to go. And so, to my mind, this is the kind of experience we're setting up for ourselves in this learning process, that initially we have to get way off track to be able to sense differences. Our measuring apparatus is not highly sensitive when we start this journey, but gradually we can tell quicker when am I not quite on balance, when am I not quite finding the easy path yet, so that as we go along it becomes quicker and easier to tell, am I heading where I want to go, or do I need to adjust something? So when we go into hands-on practice activities, we'll encourage you to really think clearly about what is it that I'm trying to do with my touch. Am I putting a hand somewhere that will give information? Is that my intention, my direction that I'm aiming for? Am I putting my hand on in a way that will suggest an option? That's a different kind of a touch. So it's really important that start at the top. That we can, in some way, ask a question of ourselves. What is it that I would like to achieve? Where would I like to end up? What... No, I'm just refining my direction. Life's a bit like that. So when we work with each other, there will be some things that we can get that feedback on our own. We can look, we can listen, we can feel. There's signs that we can pay attention to if we've got this clear question in our own minds of what do we need to know, what am I looking for. There will be times when we need to ask the person that we're working with, can you give me some clues as to whether when I put my hand here it helps you sense your shoulder blade more clearly? If I put my hand here, is it clearer or less clear? And so then, if as the recipient of the question, you can respond from your experience, your colleague will be able to get information that's useful and allows him or her to adjust. If you speak in general terms, or if the question's not clear, so for example, in our culture, we're not really good at asking for or giving feedback. We say general things like, well, you know, how was that for you? And what's the correct answer? Fine. Yeah. Not actually all that helpful. A clear question and a clear answer about the experience of the person. This one, I sort of get a connection between your hand and my shoulder blade when it's there, but when you put it in the second place, then I can really feel my shoulder blade sliding over the ribs underneath. That's kind of useful. Not the truth, but useful. Why is it not the truth? because if you put your hand on that way on somebody else's shoulder, you might get a different answer. So we're always calibrating this particular journey, not one that was made yesterday or the day before. So the information needs to be relevant to the context. It's got to be about today, now, what's happening in this moment. And, sorry?
Does that mean past experiences with different signs don't count?
No, they all experience counts, but in terms of helping me to be in the moment with this particular intention between me and you, then information about what's going on now is more useful than a conversation of, well, yesterday when such and such had their hands on me, they pushed really hard and I quite like firm pressure. That doesn't tell me anything about what I'm doing. So the purpose of this conversation is so that I end up and you end up making finer distinctions. That we increase our ability to tell when we're on track and off track with less variation. So just to think a little bit more, going back to that first question, how do you know how you feel? How do you get feedback? What questions do you ask yourself during an ATM or when you sit down to begin to put your hands on somebody? What sort of questions do you ask yourself so that you know whether you're doing something that's as useful as it can be or whether there's another option that would serve you better? Is there any discomfort? So am I feeling comfortable or am I feeling uncomfortable? Pain. Pain is a great indicator of what's going on. Hopefully, I mean that's like heading out here before we can measure the distance, the difference. Is there something that we might pick up on a little quicker than that?
Pressure.
Pressure? Yep. Breathing, yeah. So the smoothness or jerkiness of a movement.
Reversibility?
Wow. What year are we in? Tightness? Sideways what?
Sideways is like, I can't come at this movement this way. Where's the easiest place?
Where's the easiest path?
Where's the easiest place to move? Can I do it in this orientation? Do I need to change it, adjust it? So, anyway.
So it's kind of options of pathways, would that be it?
Pathways.
Yeah.
Options of pathways while holding the constraints.
Okay. Range of movement. What about range of movement? You can observe it, yeah. So if I've only got a short range in this direction, but I've got a big range there, it could be. So these are kind of more immediate things. Range is kind of an outcome, perhaps, of some of these. Okay, so that's interesting to think about. Could we say availability of movement? Would that be okay? Whoops. Ability of movement. And we'll put self and other. So could we call that distributed movement? That's that right? Or is I think to me that's more of something that happens in your head. That's not. So what do we just have? Yeah. So that's what you were paying attention to yesterday. Which parts move more and which parts move less?
Surface area of contact.
Would it be able to say contact with the ground? Is that what we're thinking of contacting? Anything else that gives you feedback about yourself or someone that you might have your hands on? What do you mean by connections? Somebody wrote a song about that, I think. Did we have something like that? No, we didn't. Yeah, distribution of movement is a bit like that, but so what would we call that kind of connecting through?
Is that travel or
Connecting through
connectivity?
connectivity, that'll do.
If I've lost my awareness of distribution and connectivity.
So if you've lost your awareness, how would you know you have lost it? Who's got the mic?
I guess I just keep checking in whether I've got the full awareness. So if I try and check in regularly, I try and keep with it, and then sometimes I get more interested in the movement, and then I come back and go, well, are you aware of everything as you're doing that? Does that?
How do you know if you're not?
I guess that comes back to these ones and resistance or reversibility or
Okay, cool.
going between
Yep.
the two. Like if something's rigid.
So some of these pain is easier to tell within yourself than with somebody else. What would be the clues that the person that you're touching is in pain? Facial expression's a good one.
Holding the breath.
Breath, yes, is a important one.
Contraction rather than if I'm protecting part of me that's in pain, I will contract, which is so that's yeah.
As a response to being touched or as a background pattern tightening, do you think? I mean, I guess if I put my hands on somebody and they go, ouch.
Yeah. So I would say slightly both.
So maybe movement, the kind of movement they do,
It's response.
you can call that a contraction.
Yeah, I agree with Margaret. I was doing the exercise on the last segment with one of the...
Given the mic.
when we were doing one of the touching exercises last segment with the hands, the guy I was doing it with was pulling my fingers, and I hate that being done to me. And but I decided not to say anything. I thought, let's just see how we both handle this and what happens. And I couldn't help myself, but I just started really kind of contracting and resisting with my fingers. And he noticed the difference, but he didn't know why it was happening. So he just diagnosed that I had some sort of issue with my
tight fingers.
And he kept on really pulling them. And so it was hilarious at the end to explain to him what was going on. He's like, right. I just thought you had an issue with, and it was like the only issue I had was with you doing that thing. So I agree with Margaret. Contraction, like the contraction.
Contractions are, Again, that's sort of getting into this way off track. We'd like to learn to pick up the clues a little bit quicker. Okay, that's not a bad sort of a list to start with. So there are things that we can see. So if there's enough brain space to hold the task I'm doing at the moment is, I've got myself organised in a way that I'm ready to move with the person, and there's a bit of space left over for now what happens when I put my hand on them. We might notice some of these things, or because we're in a learning context, we might ask a question. We might say to the person, so when I put my hand here, how far through your system do you sense it? When I use this amount of pressure, is that comfortable? Is kind of important, but what's more important perhaps is, does this allow you to sense whatever it is I would like them to sense? And then that allows them to tell you about their experience. It allows them to give you some information about what's happening now, and you to learn something about making useful distinctions. Sometimes in our enthusiasm and in our early stages of learning, we can think, oh well, he's just got an issue or something like that. And if we're on the receiving end of that, what happens to your learning process?
Well, that was actually it was quite a learning process, because I think both of us, because we had a...
Sorry, I've got it back here somehow. There you go.
We both learnt a lot out of it. So it was actually... Eventually,
yep.
Like, by the end of the exercise. Yep. I kind of suspected as much, which is why I didn't stop him and say, that's hurting my hand. Sorry, what was the question?
What happens to your learning process? So for a while, was it suspended until you got to the point where you could have the discussion?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, had I said something straight away, it would have kind of...
Thank you. Okay, and so there are some rules. Please do not allow your colleagues to hurt you. All right, it is not their intention. Their intention is to learn something about handling people in a way that is going to be useful for their learning.
Sorry, Jenny, it was the thing I wanted to say. What he did and what I've felt myself do and what I've seen people do is he went into fix-it mode. So he was analysing a problem, and he went into sort of diagnosis and fixing it, which I think is a different thing to what you're talking about. The asking of the question.
Yeah. So that's an important constraint. Please allow your colleagues to have a learning experience that is within the range of what's useful and helpful. Because one day your colleagues will graduate and they will set up practice, and maybe they live near your auntie or your friend or your colleague, and you would really like to have confidence to say, there's a Feldenkrais practitioner near you and I know this person and they'll look after you well. So the future of the profession is in our hands, and our ability to not only remember to ask for feedback, but to find ways to prompt people to ask the question. I said before, we're not well culturally trained in giving feedback. So sometimes we say nothing, or we wait until we absolutely can't help but say something, and then it doesn't come out very gently as a rule. Or we tell somebody else, oh, I worked with such and such this morning, you wouldn't want to go with them. That's not very helpful. So what can we do when we find that inadvertently somebody is doing something that's not comfortable or not pleasant or not helpful? What would be a good first response? Understanding that we're all learners and we're going to be off track at least 98% of the time. How far off track is it okay to let you and your colleague go before you give some sign that it might be time for feedback? Until it hurts? As soon as you notice, yeah.
I'd like to be able to notice that quickly.
Yep.
Because I'm going to feel ashamed if I've stuffed somebody up and hurt them. That's going to freak me out. So it's not good for my learning. So if they tell me...
So the sooner you get the feedback as the practitioner, the better.
As a person moving this slowly, I notice it and
Yep.
go, oh, actually, do you know what? Could you just do that or make that a little bit more? And I just want to feel that a bit more. You know?
So any of you that have got any kind of martial arts background know that when you've had enough, you slap the mat. We could recognise that as a signal. It's like... or just while I get my breath back. Or if it's sooner than that, then hopefully you as the doer are remembering to ask the question to check in. If that hasn't happened, maybe you could say, I'm wondering if we could just try a different angle, different pressure. Are you comfortable? Can you try adjusting your position and see if that has a different effect? So that between us we go into this question, explore, find things that are relevant, make finer distinctions, both as the person receiving and as the person doing, so that we learn safely and comfortably and effectively. And this will take practice, because how many people learnt feedback in school? I thought as much. Okay, it's a concept. I mean, we say to people, I'd just like to give you a bit of feedback here. Now that's not feedback. That's me telling you my opinion, and sometimes my opinion might be helpful to you, but it will fit the slot better. It will be a better learning experience if there's a question open first. If somebody has been able to say, can you tell me about the effect of my putting my hand in this place with this pressure? What effect is that having? Rather than, that's too hard or that hurts. There's not a receptacle in my brain ready to do anything with that, and it doesn't help me make a finer distinction. It just makes me feel bad and wrong. So between us, we want to refine not only our skills of touching, but our skills of asking questions and exploring options verbally, because that's what we're doing with our hands as well. When we put our hands on somebody, we are asking a question. Can you feel the shape of this part of you? Can you feel how it moves? Can you feel the connection between here and there? What would it be like if you tried going in this direction? Does that make a difference? So at the same time we're practicing the verbal skills, that will also help us refine our hands-on skills, which are pretty much asking the same sorts of questions.
If you're dealing with someone who has existing injury or pain in an area, you're going to like how to manage that, because I imagine an analogy is there's one. If you've ruptured an anterior cruciate ligament in your knee, there's one particular movement the surgeon can do that definitively tells whether that's what you've done. But they say it's almost useless trying to do that movement because no one is able to be relaxed enough to allow them to do it if they've actually had that injury. So, because you just can't. You can't. I know I've been there. You cannot relax your leg to allow them to twist your knee in such a way as to reveal that you've ruptured a ligament.
That's on a slightly different scale than we would be using in this room. Was your knee in pain before there was this option to twist it or not?
No. There's no pain. This is 3 months later.
I'd say there's one here that covers any scenario. One little observation that you could make if somebody doesn't feel available. Now, we sense availability in different ways. One of the ways we may sense it is range or ease of movement. But availability, if there is none, is there for a reason. It's serving a purpose. So we don't try and make something happen or make them move, but we listen to other things and maybe we'll ask a question. Have you any pain anywhere? Are you comfortable? Have you had an injury?
Yeah, stay there. And it might be useful when you do go to work with someone, you choose your partner for today, just before you begin to say, is there anything I need to know about?
I think that's a really good thing to do because some days we can when you're students or not, I'm still a student, we can feel more vulnerable for some reason. Something's just happened. You had a car accident on the way, or hopefully not, but you tripped over or something's happened in your family. So something is really going on in your system, preoccupying you, and it's important that that's taken into consideration. It's not that you have to necessarily discuss the whole issue, but just to let someone know that is going on for you will make a big difference, both as a receiver and as someone who's exploring.
I think we have talked very much about physical things here. I have just experienced recently when you just put it in. I just was the other day working with one of my stroke clients, and there's very limited movement, and for him it was just that was the smallest movement, and suddenly he just had fear of falling. So sometimes you only know when you do the smallest things which you don't even know. Like sure. I was hardly touching him and moving him, and he immediately felt like he would fall, and it was such
And could you tell pretty quickly that something had changed? Or did he have to tell you?
No, I could.
You could see it,
but
feel it.
I was really surprised because it was a minuscule movement.
So we can also ask the question, what do we think is small? Well, I would say a micromillimeter is small. And everyone's appreciation of what feels like a large movement is really different. So there's many aspects to that. I mean, it's a good point you raise, Martine, but many aspects to it.
I've got 2 points. So one goes back to Martina and one goes back to Simon. With Simon, with the pain, I had that question coming up yesterday too. That was for the first time that really interested me. Like, what do you do with someone with pain and movement? And I guess it comes... I think you, Stephanie, said like you can start in your imagination. You don't have to do the movement. Like you can explore options just through your imagination. And I guess it links into pain not being something you need to fix again. Like it's not a fixing thing, but how do we integrate that into finding options, I guess. It's like my current understanding. And then with Martina, and what you asked in the start, Jenny, like, how do we know how we feel? last segment, I really, really, really strongly experienced heaps of emotions that came through the technique, and that really startled and surprised me because I did not expect this technique to link into my emotions at all. I got really overwhelmed. And so as response to your question, I felt like, oh, does it mean, like, maybe we can also see, oh, Feldenkrais, does it allow us to voluntarily more choose which emotions, like, does it give us options in our emotions because we start being aware of it and how it relates to our bodies? And I am starting to really sense that, yes, it does. I can apply that. And the reason why I got really emotional, I think, was because the way we hold our bodies relates so much to our habitual things. And then, you know, like, I was starting to experiment with my habitual safety habits that, you know, were keeping me safe. And I was like going beyond what maybe I was, like, it was bringing up stuff because I was going other ways and I wasn't sure if I was safe there or not. Like, it was relating to that fear and a lot of, like, I had no testing of this new way. Like, I had no experience that said, oh, that this is safe or not for me to be. So I think it goes so far.
I think
and it's
we
really
can all be
technique.
surprised what can pop out in any moment, whether it's a change in emotional state, a change in physical sensation, a change in our thought patterns, a change in the way we move. Moshe said we've got all these things and they're all very much interrelated.
In the in-between segments, I found for a while I was really resilient to doing much ATMs because I was not really wanting to explore.
I'm not surprised.
I didn't feel safe to go there, and then it sort of started again to feel like, oh, I can go there. And what did I want to say? I think I lost it. Yeah.
Maybe come back now.
Come back if it pops back into your head.
Oh yeah, I asked Julie at last segment what happens for her with people that have a lot of emotions come up. And she said it doesn't happen so much in FI because you stay with people in their comfort range. You put the emphasis on, you know, go where it's easy and comfortable, so it doesn't trigger moments of where you struggle so much. But in ATMs it happens a lot more because people, and for me it was, I do a lot of meditation, for example, and it, like, yeah, okay, you might have to
maybe,
but like I felt like with Feldenkrais, you might just, it might just totally surprise you, because it might be really random to you that this movement is linked into this emotion for you or something. Like, you might just not, because maybe you're just not aware, and then it just comes and you just poof. And Julie said, like, what I do is not talk about the emotion or the thing that's coming up, but I give them a push through their feet so they connect back through their spine, and that is a really reassuring thing. And since then I'm just like exploring this, how does my emotion like sit in my body, and what can I like do with my body to sort of deal with emotions that come up.
And
so
can you still find the ground?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, it was about finding that connection through the middle.
So every thought has a posture, and doing unfamiliar movements may well connect us with unfamiliar thoughts and emotions, some of which are delightful and some of which are a little perplexing or even scary. And that finding our way home to the ground is where we can begin that safe exploration of, is that something I want to look at more, or not today, thank you very much. And so if when we're doing something on our own or with someone else, something unexpected happens, we cope with it and come back to it, bearing in mind that we both have the responsibility to be checking, keeping track, asking questions, or just saying, I need to stop for a moment, I can't deal with something right now, just need some breathing time. And if I've been the person who's had my hands on the person that's had a reaction, then I need to be able to know that it's not my fault and I don't have to fix it. And if somebody gets distressed, there are experienced people around with life vests on to help. Stuff happens, and we're in a safe place, and we'll take care of you. But coming back to the ground is the safest place for all of us.
Just want to make one more comment about the, how much we think is a little movement. How many of you had the experience in ATM of imagining and feeling your self mobilise somehow? Feeling little sensations in the muscles. Okay, so that was a thought. I had an experience in my practice, it was a really powerful one, with a client who turned out I couldn't touch her at all. As soon as I touched her, my touch came with an intention. She felt my intention 100 times more powerfully than I even knew I was thinking it. So our thought, our intention is going to be sensed by the person, even possibly, it depends on the sensitivity of the receiver and how fine a distinction they're able to make, but even before we even feel we've made a connection. And so I suspect with that particular person you're talking about, yeah, yeah. So movement is from still, it's a scale, it's a continuum. And, there's movement in the mind and then it gradually expresses it. So it's a huge continuum. I just wanted to add that. If you're interested another time, I'll tell a story about that client. It's interesting. But I think just before we go to lunch, it'd be worthwhile just practicing a little something of what we've been talking about here. So, could get into a group of 4 and 2 people lie down on their side in a comfortable position. So 2 people lie down on their side with a little bit of space between them. Group of 4.
3 people and yourself.
Thank you. I like 2 people lying down on their side, 2 people sitting. Now, could you... So I know you haven't had a lot of experience of doing practices or activities in the training program. But you get to be limited in your options depending on how you arrange yourself relative to another group. So now my next guideline is, could you move yourself away from another group and organize yourself so that there is, both people are sitting in the same, lying in the same orientation, heads in the same direction. So we're going to reduce the degrees of complexity. Now, can you communicate and have one ear open to listen? Could you, the people of the partners who are lying down, could you get something for under their heads? If they haven't got a towel there, but something that brings the line of their spine to the same level. It's a little low. So you might, there's pads here, there's okay. The people who are sitting, we won't get too technical about it, we'll talk about more later. So just look, just take a best guess. Not touching at this point. And the people who are lying, could you bend your legs so that you have a right angle between your thighs and your pelvis and your lower legs and your knees? People who are their partners, could you sit at their head end for a moment? Are you comfortable? So check in for yourself. What feedback do you have right now that informs you about your own comfort? So without even having an intention, in your way of sitting, have you got any places where you're feeling pressure that might be perturbing to you? Can you sense your breathing? Are you available to move? What's your facial expression like? Okay, now if I was to ask you to organize yourself so that you could bring your hands, don't do it, but bring your hands to touch your partner in the region of their shoulder. Are you in a position that enables you to do it? Now, if you've changed your position, check again. Are you comfortable? So when we engage with somebody in FI or in these practices, you're not wanting to give all your attention away. I mean, there are times when we do that. For sure, I do. I think it'd be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't leave themselves behind at a moment at some time. But the intention is to have a mobile way of attending to yourself and the other so that you can pick up these cues before they build, so to speak. So could you bring your hands to contact your partner's shoulder and just pause there? Hands, whichever you like. Just pause. With making contact. Are you comfortable? Can you breathe? So if you can't, if you feel like you're sensing in yourself some tightness or some pressure or you've got limited options, then maybe you want to adjust yourself. So you two have given yourself limited options so feel free to change. When you discover something, like how long do you leave it before you ask your partner to move forward a little bit? Sometimes we think, oh, I don't want to disturb them, they look comfortable, I'm too interested in what I'm doing. So we don't make those corrections or adjustments until way too late. So please take your hands away. And then this time, notice how you engage, like how you make that contact. Whether it's something about the speed, the pressure, how you contour your hand, and bring your hand or hands so that you could sense them, and you might be helping them to sense themselves with not a particular address at this moment in the region of their shoulder. So you're sensing them through their shoulder. So bring your hands again to that place. But notice how you contact, how you contour your hands. And then just keep your hands there. Now, if you don't feel comfortable, this is where you have every permission to adjust yourself, take your hands away. But now the people on the floor, could you give them, your partner, some feedback about what their contact is like? It's your experience. What do you feel? Now, it may be as simple as, I feel your two hands touching me. Okay, please take your hands away and pause. Okay, end of discussion. So we're just trying for the simplest, just so that you start to practice this. Now, there may not be anything that you can give them feedback. It's okay to say, I can't think of anything right now. Nothing stands out. That's feedback. Okay? Did anyone get feedback that they really liked? Could you call it out? What it was?
Yeah.
What was it?
Melissa said that that the touch is just right, it's comfortable, she feels like she can move and it is soothing.
Okay, but we didn't ask her to move. So, but the feedback that it's comfortable, that's feedback.
Why the movement was relevant was because I actually moved my hand gently with her breathing. I didn't restrict
Okay.
the shoulder blade in her breathing pattern.
Okay. All right. So take your hands away for a moment. You can see there's a few people are raring to touch. That's wonderful. Okay. So this time, bring your hands where you feel you could contour, connect with them in a way that you might begin to explore the movement of their shoulder girdle or the movement possibilities of this person through their shoulder. So you're not actually going to move them yet. You're just going to, maybe it's the same way of holding them, maybe it's another. People on the floor, can you offer feedback about your partner's touch now? Okay, pause. End of discussion, please. Because you can talk about that probably for another 10 minutes. Now, person on the floor, could you move your shoulder? Move yourself with your shoulder a little forwards and backwards, and the person sitting, could you go for a ride? stop. So here we have two people doing something. So you have an opportunity. The person on the floor could give feedback about what they noticed, but can you give feedback about where the person's hands are or how the person's hands are? And the person who is going along for the ride, you might notice that they're going too fast and you can't keep up. So it's possible you could ask them to slow down a little. Could you try going a little slower? Could we see what that's like? So the feedback can be two-way. So try it again. Person on the floor, you're moving your shoulder a little forwards or backwards. Okay, can you give each other any feedback about this? About how you might like it to try it a little differently? But you're not... We're going to do something else, so don't worry. Yeah. Okay. Please pause. And could the people who are sitting go to the other person? Go and sit with the other person. And you're just going to repeat the same process. Three opportunities to try out with permission to make mistakes. Saying something about the contact. It's not saying something about your experience of the contact that could help the doer. So the first one is contact. The next one is hands as if you wanted to move them through their shoulder or from their shoulder. And the third one is go for a ride.